soup has always had a quiet but powerful place in British food culture. For generations, a warm bowl of soup has meant comfort, simplicity, and relief on cold grey afternoons when the wind rattles the windows and the sky refuses to brighten. It is one of those foods that crosses class, age, and background. Students living on tight budgets eat it. Families serve it as a quick evening meal. Pensioners warm a tin on the hob for something easy and filling. In many ways, soup represents the idea that food does not have to be complicated to be satisfying. A simple combination of stock, vegetables, herbs, and meat can create something deeply comforting. But the modern supermarket aisle tells a very different story. Walk into any British supermarket today and you will see entire shelves stacked with tins and cartons promising rich flavor, real ingredients, and homemade taste. Labels show pictures of thick, creamy bowls filled with tender chicken pieces, fresh herbs, and golden broth. Yet behind those carefully designed labels, the reality inside many tins can be far less impressive. Over the past few years, food analysts and consumer watchdogs have started paying closer attention to what actually goes into some of the most popular tin soup sold in the United Kingdom. And what they discovered has raised some uncomfortable questions about value, ingredients, and the power of brand trust. Many of the biggest brands that dominate supermarket shelves rely heavily on water, starches, thickeners, and flavoring agents rather than real meat or slow-cooked stock. In some cases, the actual chicken content in a cream of chicken soup is shockingly small. And yet those tins can cost 2 or even 3 times more than cheaper alternatives sitting just a few centimeters away on the same shelf. It raises a simple question that more and more shoppers are beginning to ask. When you buy a tin of chicken soup, are you really paying for quality, or are you simply paying for the name printed on the label? Today we are going to break down that question by looking at some of the most widely sold chicken soups in British supermarkets. Some of them have been household names for decades. Others are supermarket own brand options that quietly compete on price. By comparing ingredients, texture, flavor, and overall value, we can start to see which tins truly deliver comfort and flavor and which ones might not be worth your money at all. The results might surprise you because price and reputation do not always match what ends up in your bowl. Let's start with one of the most recognizable tins in British supermarkets. Heinz Cream of Chicken Soup. For many people in the UK, the red Heinz label instantly triggers a wave of nostalgia. Generations grew up with Heinz soups in the cupboard. Tomato soup with toast soldiers, cream of mushroom poured over baked potatoes, and of course the classic cream of chicken. It is a brand built on trust. When shoppers reach for a Heinz tin, they often assume they are choosing the safest and highest quality option on the shelf. After all, Heinz has spent more than a century building a reputation for reliability and flavor. But when we take a closer look at what actually goes into a tin of Heinz cream of chicken soup today, the picture becomes a lot more complicated. Turn the tin around and read the ingredient list carefully. The first thing you notice is that the base is mostly water. That is not unusual for soup, of course. But the next ingredients reveal where the body of the soup really comes from. Modified corn flour, rapeseed oil, dried milk products, and flavorings. These ingredients create the thick, creamy texture that many people associate with comfort food. But the crucial detail is the actual chicken content. Just 3%. That means in a 400-gram tin, only a tiny fraction of the content is real chicken. The rest is essentially a mixture of thickened liquid designed to mimic the richness of a homemade stock. Now consider the price. In many UK supermarkets, Heinz Cream of Chicken Soup sells for around £1.65 per tin. Sometimes slightly more depending on the store. That places it firmly in the premium category compared with many supermarket-owned brands that sell for around 60p. On paper, that price difference suggests that Heinz should deliver significantly better flavor, more meat, and a richer overall experience. But when taste testers compare Heinz side by side with cheaper alternatives, the results can be surprising. The Heinz soup is indeed thick, but that thickness mostly comes from starch rather than real chicken stock. The seasoning leans heavily on salt to boost flavor. And while the soup is smooth and familiar, it often lacks the deeper savory notes that come from slow-cooked bones and meat. What this means in practical terms is that many shoppers are paying nearly 3 times as much for a soup that contains roughly the same proportion of chicken as budget options. The difference lies mainly in brand recognition, packaging, and decades of marketing that built emotional trust with consumers. When people realize that, the illusion of premium quality can start to crumble. Heinz is not necessarily bad soup. It is perfectly edible and comforting in the way many processed foods are. But when measured purely by ingredients and value for money, it may not be the best choice on the shelf. Next on the list is Asda's own brand chicken soup, one of the most affordable options available in the UK supermarket market. Priced around 60 pence for a 400-gram tin, it sits firmly in the budget category. At first glance, many shoppers assume that a tin at this price must cut serious corners. After all, if Heinz charges nearly 3 times as much, the expectation is that cheaper products will taste thinner or more artificial. But the ingredient list for Asda's chicken soup actually reveals a surprisingly straightforward formula. The base again begins with water and modified maize starch, which provides the body of the soup. Chicken appears at around 2% of the contents, slightly lower than Heinz but still within the same general range seen across the industry. Rapeseed oil, fortified wheat flour, and salt round out the core ingredients. One interesting detail is the inclusion of dairy elements like whey and double cream. These ingredients add a subtle richness to the texture, giving the soup a smoother mouthfeel than many shoppers expect at such a low price point. Importantly, the label does not list artificial colors or hydrogenated fats, which have historically been criticized in processed foods. Instead, the seasoning leans towards simple savory flavors like onion and garlic. In taste tests, Asda's soup tends to produce a light but pleasant chicken flavor. It does not overwhelm the palate, and the texture is noticeably thinner than some thicker premium brands. But that thinness also makes it feel more like a traditional broth rather than a starch-heavy cream sauce. For shoppers watching their budget, the distinction matters. While the chicken pieces are minimal and the soup lacks the visual appeal of more expensive brands, the overall flavor can feel surprisingly balanced. In fact, some testers prefer the lighter consistency because it avoids the artificial thickness found in heavily processed soups. The shredded chicken pieces are small and sparse, but they are present, giving the soup at least a hint of substance. When you factor in the price, Asda's option begins to look like a practical choice rather than a compromise. It may not deliver gourmet flavor, but it proves that affordable soup does not automatically mean low quality. Moving on to Tesco's cream of chicken soup, another budget option priced around 63 pence per tin. Tesco is one of the largest supermarket chains in the UK, and its own brand products dominate shelves across the country. With such a massive distribution network, Tesco soups often end up in millions of kitchens every year. The expectation for a product at this price point is simple convenience. Something warm, quick, and filling that can be heated in minutes. But when taste testers evaluated Tesco's cream of chicken soup more closely, the results were less encouraging than many shoppers might expect. The first thing people notice is the texture. Compared with other brands in the same category, Tesco soup tends to be thinner and more watery. The pale creamy color looks uniform, but the consistency does not cling to the spoon the way richer soups do. When heated, the aroma is mild and slightly creamy, but the scent of real chicken is faint. As you take the first spoonful, the flavor reveals the main issue. There is very little depth. The soup tastes light and diluted, almost like a basic chicken stock that has been thickened slightly. Seasoning is minimal, which means the soup never develops the savory punch that many people expect from a cream of chicken base. Chicken pieces are extremely scarce. In some tins, you may struggle to find more than a few small shreds. Without those pieces to add texture and flavor, each spoonful feels more like warm liquid than a hearty meal. The creamy note exists, but it is subtle and quickly fades, leaving behind a bland aftertaste. Nutrition levels fall within typical ranges for processed soup, but that does not compensate for the lack of flavor complexity. In blind taste tests, many participants found it difficult to distinguish Tesco's soup from a basic thickened broth. For a quick snack, it can provide warmth and comfort, but as a satisfying meal, it struggles to compete with stronger contenders. Now let's talk about Baxter's Favourites cream of chicken soup, a product positioned much higher on the price ladder. At around £2.15 per tin, Baxter's markets itself as a premium brand. The packaging often emphasizes heritage recipes and quality ingredients, suggesting a more refined product than standard supermarket options. When you open a tin of Baxter's, the first impression is indeed promising. The color is rich and creamy, and the texture appears thick and velvety. The soup coats the spoon beautifully, creating the visual expectation of something indulgent and hearty. Chicken flakes are visible, adding substance that some cheaper soups lack. But when it comes to flavor, Baxter's produces a more divided reaction. The seasoning is bold, particularly in its use of black pepper. For some people, this peppery note adds excitement and warmth to the soup. For others, it overwhelms the natural flavor of the chicken. Instead of tasting the subtle sweetness and savoriness of poultry, the palate picks up a sharp pepper edge that dominates the experience. This creates a soup that feels hearty but slightly unbalanced. At over £2 per tin, shoppers naturally expect something exceptional. Yet the flavor depth does not quite match the premium price tag. The soup is certainly filling. The creamy consistency makes it satisfying as a quick meal, especially when served with bread or crackers. But tasters often remark that the seasoning overshadows the ingredients rather than enhancing them. It is a good soup in terms of texture and presentation, but it stops just short of becoming truly memorable. In other words, Baxter's proves that premium packaging and thick consistency alone cannot guarantee a perfect balance of flavor. Another interesting contender is Co-op cream of chicken soup, typically priced around 90p per tin. Visually, this soup begins with strong first impressions. The base appears creamy and pale yellow, and the consistency is thick enough to suggest a comforting bowl of soup. When heated, the aroma is mild but inviting. The spoon glides through a smooth texture that seems promising. But as with several other mid-range soups, the tasting experience reveals a different story. The main issue here is the limited presence of real chicken flavor. Although the soup looks thick and satisfying, the actual taste of chicken is surprisingly faint. Instead, the dominant flavor leans toward a slightly artificial creaminess with a subtle cheese-like note. That flavor may come from dairy components or flavoring agents designed to mimic richness. While the texture coats the mouth nicely, the absence of genuine meaty depth leaves the soup feeling incomplete. For a quick snack, Co-op soup works well enough. It warms quickly and has a comforting consistency. But for a product priced higher than most budget options, the expectation is that it should deliver more substance and stronger flavor. Instead, the soup ends up feeling like a middle-of-the-road compromise. Not terrible, but not particularly impressive either. Finally, among the weaker contenders, we arrive at Sainsbury's cream of chicken soup. Priced similarly to Tesco's option at around 63p, it sits firmly in the budget category. The soup's appearance is slightly darker than some rivals, suggesting a richer base. However, the texture can feel somewhat gloopy rather than creamy. When stirred, it forms a thick consistency that does not quite achieve the smoothness expected from a classic cream soup. Chicken pieces are minimal, often appearing as small shreds scattered through the liquid. The flavor is mild and somewhat muted. While the soup provides warmth and a sense of comfort, it lacks the rich chicken stock character that defines the best versions of this dish. Seasoning is light, which prevents it from tasting overly salty but also means the overall flavor feels flat. As with many low-cost soups, the product succeeds mainly as a convenient way to produce a hot meal in minutes. But convenience alone cannot make up for the absence of depth and substance that many shoppers hope for when buying cream of chicken soup. After exploring those disappointing options, it is only fair to highlight the soups that actually impress testers for flavor, value, and overall quality. The first standout comes from Marks & Spencer. Known for positioning itself slightly above standard supermarket ranges, M&S has built a reputation for focusing on ingredient quality. Its cream of chicken soup, priced around 65p per 400-gram tin, might surprise people who assume M&S products are always expensive. In fact, this soup often undercuts many big brand competitors, including Heinz. One of the most notable differences appears immediately in the ingredient list. M&S uses cooked chicken breast, which signals a higher quality meat source than generic chicken flavoring or processed fragments. The soup also contains double cream and chicken stock, creating a richer base without relying excessively on starch thickeners. When heated on the hob, the texture becomes noticeably thicker and smoother than many other tins in the same price range. The soup coats the spoon comfortably, giving the impression of a fuller, more satisfying bowl. Flavor is where the difference truly becomes clear. Because the soup uses less salt and sugar than some rivals, the natural taste of chicken and cream comes through more clearly. The result is a balanced profile that feels closer to homemade cooking than heavily processed convenience food. Chicken pieces remain modest in size, but they are visible and provide a sense of substance that many cheaper soups lack. For many taste testers, M&S delivered the best overall combination of price, texture, and flavor in the entire lineup. Another strong performer is Campbell's Condensed Cream of Chicken Soup, a brand with a long history in British kitchens. Campbell's sits in the mid-range price category, usually between £1.20 and £1.50 depending on where you shop. What makes Campbell's unique is its condensed format. Unlike ready-to-eat soups, this product requires dilution with water or milk. That design actually increases its versatility. While it can be used as a traditional bowl of soup, many home cooks rely on Campbell's as a base for sauces, casseroles, pasta dishes, and pies. The ingredient list reveals why it performs well in cooking. In addition to chicken and cream, Campbell's includes aromatic ingredients like sage extract, garlic extract, and onion oil. These components create layers of savory flavor that deepen as the soup cooks or simmers. In many kitchens, Campbell's has become something of a secret ingredient for creamy recipes. Instead of making a sauce from scratch, cook simply add a tin of condensed soup and let the flavors develop. That versatility gives Campbell's a special place in many households. Then there is Newgate Cream of Chicken Soup, a budget option sold primarily through discount supermarkets. At around 59p per tin, it is one of the cheapest products in the entire category. Yet surprisingly, it delivers impressive value. The ingredient list is simple and straightforward, featuring British sauce chicken along with wheat flour, vegetable oil, milk proteins, and seasoning. During taste tests, Newgate produced a strong chicken flavor with visible chunks of meat throughout the soup. The texture is notably thick, almost bordering on heavy for some people, but that thickness contributes to a feeling of substance and heartiness. For families trying to stretch their grocery budget, Newgate represents an example of how a low-cost product can still provide satisfying flavor. It does not rely heavily on flashy branding or marketing campaigns. Instead, it focuses on delivering a simple, filling soup that does exactly what people expect from comfort food. Finally, one of the most surprising winners comes from Aldi's Bramwell's Cream of Chicken Soup. Priced around 62p per tin, this soup competes directly with other budget brands. But the flavor profile sets it apart almost immediately. When heated, the aroma reveals notes of thyme and parsley, two herbs that bring freshness and complexity to the bowl. These real herbal elements create a depth that many processed soups struggle to achieve. Independent taste tests in the UK have given Bramwell's a score of around 7 out of 10, placing it above several well-known brands that cost significantly more. The soup balances creaminess with herbal warmth, producing a flavor that feels comforting rather than artificial. It demonstrates that sometimes the best value on the shelf is not the most expensive tin, but the one that quietly focuses on flavor rather than branding. What this entire comparison ultimately reveals is something many shoppers are beginning to realize across the food industry. Price does not always equal quality. A higher price tag can reflect marketing budgets, brand heritage, and packaging design rather than better ingredients. At the same time, budget products are not automatically inferior. Some supermarkets invest significant effort into developing their own brands, often working with the same factories that produce big-name products. The result can be a tin that tastes just as good or even better than the famous label next to it. For consumers, the lesson is simple but powerful. Turning the tin around and reading the ingredient list can reveal far more about a product than the front label ever will. Look at the percentage of real meat. Notice how many thickeners or starches appear in the recipe. Pay attention to salt levels and seasoning. These details tell you whether a soup relies on genuine ingredients or simply mimics them through processing techniques. soup will always remain a staple of British comfort food. Whether served as a quick lunch, a simple dinner, or a base for cooking, it provides warmth and familiarity that few other foods can match. But the next time you walk down the supermarket aisle, it might be worth taking a closer look at those neatly stacked tins. Because behind the labels and slogans, some soups are delivering real value and flavor, while others are quietly selling little more than water, starch, and nostalgia in a brightly printed can.